The sky over Charisma 4 did not fade into darkness. It bled. Every evening, the triple suns sank behind the jagged dunes of the Rust Sea, painting the atmosphere in violent shades of crimson and burnt gold. Vane Karsan stood on the porch of his makeshift sanctuary, a structure built from the rusted hull of a crashed freighter and reinforced with local sandstone. He drew a long breath of the filtered air, tasting the faint metallic tang of the desert. In the silence of the wasteland, Vane found a bitter kind of peace. He had spent 20 years in the orbital paratrooper divisions of the Terran Command, jumping into hellscapes far worse than this. His ears still rang with the echoes of the shattered moon campaign, and his skin bore the white, jagged maps of a dozen surgeries. Out here, there were no commanders to give orders he couldn't live with, and no ghosts to stare at him from the shadows of a barracks. Then the silence broke. A high-pitched scream tore through the upper atmosphere, followed by a shock wave that rattled the solar panels on Vane's roof. He looked up, squinting against the glare of the final sun. A streak of violet fire cut a jagged path across the horizon. It wasn't a meteor. Meteors tumbled. This thing was fighting the air, its stabilizers glowing with a frantic, pulsing blue light. "Damn it all," Vane muttered. He stepped back into the hut and grabbed his ion pulse long gun. He didn't know who was dropping from the sky, but on Charisma 4, visitors usually brought trouble. He hopped onto his sand skiff, the engine coughing to life with a low, rhythmic thrum. He pushed the throttle, and the vehicle glided over the dunes, kicking up plumes of red dust. It took him 40 minutes to reach the crash site. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt composite plating. The vessel, a sleek, needle-shaped craft unlike anything in the Terran fleet, was buried nose first in a massive dune. It shimmered with a strange, iridescent sheen, like the wing of a dragonfly. Vane dismounted, keeping his weapon leveled at the smoking hull. "Terran Command?" he shouted, though he already knew the answer. The design was too fluid, too organic. This was Xylari technology. A hiss of escaping gas echoed through the canyon of sand. A side hatch groaned open, warped by the impact. A figure tumbled out, falling onto the burning sand. Vane rushed forward, his boots sinking deep into the dune. It was a woman, or at least the Xylari equivalent of one. Her skin was a deep, translucent lavender, glowing faintly even in her unconscious state. Silver hair, matted with purple blood, spilled across her cracked flight suit. The suit itself was a marvel of engineering, composed of interlocking plates that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "Hey, can you hear me?" Vane knelt beside her, flipping her over gently. Her eyes snapped open. They were wide, lidless orbs of pure starlight, swirling with nebulas of gold and white. She gasped, a wet, rattling sound, and her hand, slender with 4 long fingers, clutched at Vane's forearm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by the sheer terror of the dying. "Vanera, Kal," she whispered, the words bubbling through the blood in her throat. Vane didn't speak Xylari, but he knew a death rattle when he heard one. He looked at the wreckage. The ship's reactor was venting lethal levels of radiation, and the secondary fuel cells were seconds away from a thermal runaway. If he left her here, she would be vaporized within minutes. "Hold on, lady. This is going to hurt," Vane said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He didn't think about the politics. He didn't think about the fact that his former superiors would pay a fortune for her corpse, let alone her life. He just saw a pilot who had fallen from the sky, much like he had so many times before. He scooped her up, her weight surprisingly light, and ran for the sand skiff. He had barely cleared the first ridge when the ship went. The explosion was silent at first, a sphere of blinding white light that consumed the dune, followed by a roar that shook the very foundations of the planet. Vane didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the horizon, the lavender woman cradled against his chest, her purple blood staining his old military jacket. Back at the hut, he laid her on his workbench. He didn't have much: some outdated med gel, a few rolls of sterile gauze, and a portable oxygen concentrator. He spent the next 3 hours working in feverish silence. He cut away the damaged plates of her suit, marveling at the way the material felt like living skin. He cleaned the deep gash in her side, applying the med gel and watching as the Xylari physiology reacted. the purple flesh knitting together at a visible speed. As the second sun rose, the woman's breathing stabilized. The glow beneath her skin deepened to a soft, healthy amethyst. Vane sat in a corner, cleaning his rifle by habit, his eyes never leaving her. "What are you, really?" he whispered to the empty room. "And why do I feel like I just signed my own death warrant?" Lyra-Va drifted in a sea of fractured memories. She remembered the betrayal of the House Obsidian Council, the way her own navigation systems had been locked from the outside, and the terrifying moment the stars had turned into streaks of white fire as her ship entered the atmosphere of the Forbidden World. She expected the cold embrace of the void. She expected the silence of the ancestors. Instead, she felt warmth. Her eyes flickered open. The ceiling above her was made of corrugated metal, scarred by rust and heat. The air was dry, smelling of old grease, and something she didn't recognize: the scent of a human. She tried to sit up, but a sharp spike of pain in her ribs forced a groan from her lips. "Easy there," a voice said. It was deep, like the grinding of tectonic plates, but it carried an unexpected softness. Lyra turned her head. A human sat in the shadows, his face a landscape of scars and stubble. He was dressed in rugged, utilitarian fabrics, and his eyes, the color of storm clouds, were fixed on her with a wary intensity. You are the one," Lyra whispered. She spoke the trade tongue of the sector, her voice raspy but clear. The human stood up, his massive frame nearly touching the ceiling. "I'm Vane, and you're lucky to be breathing, pilot. That ship of yours turned into a very expensive crater about 5 kilometers back." Lyra looked down at her side. She saw the bandages, the human-made med gel, and the way her suit had been carefully removed to allow her wounds to heal. Her heart began to beat with a frantic, rhythmic pulse, the pulse of acknowledgement. "You saved me," she said, her starlight eyes widening. "From the fire, from the end." Vane shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "I don't like seeing things burn. Don't make a big deal out of it. Once you're fit to walk, I've got a radio. We can try to signal one of your scout ships, or maybe a neutral freighter." Lyra shook her head slowly, her silver hair shimmering in the dim light. "No, you do not understand, human Vane. You have invoked the Oth-Kala." Vane frowned, leaning against a support beam. "The what?" "Look, if that's some kind of religious thing, I'm not interested. I'm an atheist by trade and a hermit by choice." "It is not a choice," Lyra said, her voice gaining strength. She forced herself to sit up, ignoring the protest of her muscles. She reached out and touched the sleeve of Vane's jacket, where her blood had dried into a dark purple stain. The Oth-Kala is the unbreakable thread. In the culture of the Xylari, a life is a sacred pattern. When a warrior's pattern is shredded by fate, and another reaches into the abyss to pull them back, the patterns become one. Vane stared at her for a long moment, then let out a sharp, cynical laugh. "Wait, are you telling me that because I dragged you out of a burning ship, we're suddenly partners? That's not how the universe works, lady." "It is how my universe works," Lyra replied solemnly. She stood up, her legs wobbly but her posture regal. "I am Lyra-Va, daughter of the Obsidian line. By the law of my people, my life is no longer mine to hold. It belongs to the one who preserved it. I am your Rangbuak, your bonded. Where you go, I go. What you suffer, I suffer." Vane rubbed his temples, his eyes closed. "Look, Lyra, I saved you because it was the right thing to do. Not because I wanted a shadow. I like my life quiet. I like being alone. I don't need a lavender alien following me around telling me our souls are glued together." "It is more than souls," Lyra said, stepping closer. The air between them seemed to hum with a faint electrical charge. "The Oth-Kala is a biological resonance. Can you not feel it? The way your heart aligns with mine?" Vane opened his eyes. He wanted to tell her she was crazy. He wanted to tell her that it was just the lingering effects of the radiation or the shock, but he couldn't. There was a warmth in his chest, a strange, tethering sensation that hadn't been there before. It felt like a wire made of light, stretching from his sternum to hers. "I feel a headache," Vane grunted. "The brass won't like this," a voice crackled from a radio on the table. It was a human frequency, encrypted but leaking through the old speakers. "Target identified. tracking the crash trajectory. Commander Thorne wants the Xylari pilot alive for interrogation. Move in. Vane's expression shifted instantly. The annoyance vanished, replaced by the cold, calculated mask of a soldier. He grabbed his rifle and checked the charge. They're coming, Vane said, his voice dropping an octave. My people. And they don't do sacred patterns. They do labs in cages. Lyra looked at him, her eyes swirling with gold. Then we must move, my bonded. Our pattern has only just begun. Vane looked at the door, then back at the alien woman who had just claimed his life. He cursed under his breath, a string of military slang that Lyra didn't understand but recognized as a sign of frustration. Fine, Vane said, grabbing a pack of supplies. But if we're going to be bonded, you'd better know how to shoot, because on this planet nobody gets a second chance. He offered her a hand. Lyra took it, her slender fingers interlocking with his rough, calloused palm. The thread tightened, a silent promise whispered in the dust of Charisma 4. The sound of the Terran dropships was a low-frequency vibration that rattled the marrow of Vane's bones before it even reached his ears. He knew that sound, the heavy mechanical thrum of a Valkyrie-class transport designed to carry 24 armored infantrymen and enough ordnance to level a small village. They were coming in hot, and they weren't using their stealth bafflers. This was an overt show of force, a message to anyone listening that the Terran command owned this patch of dirt. Move! We're burning daylight and luck, Vane barked, tossing a rugged tactical vest to Lyra. She caught it with fluid grace, her starlight eyes scanning the equipment with a mix of curiosity and disdain. This fabric feels dead, Vane Karsan. It does not breathe. It stops bullets, and that's the only job it has today. Vane grunted as he slammed a high-capacity cell into his ion pulse rifle. He looked around his hut one last time. 10 years of quiet, 10 years of building a sanctuary from the scrap of a broken life, and it was all going to be ash in about 5 minutes. He grabbed a small battered metal box from under his bunk, the only thing he truly cared about, and shoved it into his rucksack. We're taking the skiff. Stay low and don't speak unless I tell you. If the brass sees your face, they'll stop being polite and start being terminal. They slipped out the back hatch just as the first dropship crested the ridge, its spotlight cutting through the dawn mist like a giant's eye. Vane kicked the sand skiff into gear. The engine roared, a guttural, angry sound that echoed against the sandstone walls of the canyon. They blurred across the dunes, the vehicle's repulsors screaming as Vane pushed them to the limit. Behind them, the hut disappeared in a blossom of white fire. A tactical missile, likely fired from a hovering drone, had turned his home into a funeral pyre for his past. They destroyed your nest, Lyra said, her voice carrying over the wind, devoid of pity but heavy with observation. Because of me. It was just a pile of tin, Vane lied, his knuckles white on the steering vanes. I've lost better things in worse places. Keep your eyes on the horizon. If we hit a pocket of quicksand or a metallic surge, we're done. The Rust Sea was a 300-kilometer expanse of iron-rich sand that behaved more like a liquid than solid ground. It was plagued by electromagnetic storms and inhabited by things that had evolved to eat metal and bone alike. For Vane, it was the only place where the Terran scanners would struggle to track them. The iron interference was a natural cloak, but it was also a death trap. As they dove deeper into the dunes, the sky began to change. The violet hues of the morning were being swallowed by a bruised, sickly green. A surge storm was brewing. Vane, Lyra called out, her hand suddenly gripping his shoulder. Her touch sent a jolt of warmth through him, a sensation that wasn't just physical. It was the Oth-Kala link pulsing like a warning light. The air, it tastes of iron and ancient anger. Something is following us, but it is not of your world. Vane glanced at the rearview monitor. He saw nothing but swirling red dust. The dropships can't follow us into the sea. Their sensors would fry in 10 mics. Not your ships, she whispered, her eyes turning a deep, haunted shade of indigo. A seeker, from the House Obsidian. They have bypassed the veil. Vane's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked up. High above the dust clouds, a sliver of darkness moved against the green sky. It was silent, shaped like a serrated blade, cutting through the atmosphere with a grace that defied physics. It was a Xylari interceptor, and it was dropping toward them with predatory intent. "Hang on!" Vane shouted. He veered the skiff into a steep canyon, the walls closing in until there were only inches of clearance on either side. He was banking on the fact that the Xylari ship was too wide to follow them into the crevice. The skiff skidded on a patch of glassified sand, the repulsors whining in protest. Vane fought the controls, his muscles burning as he wrestled the vehicle through a series of hair-raising turns. Above them, a beam of violet energy struck the rim of the canyon, sending tons of rock cascading down behind them. "They aren't trying to capture you, Lyra!" Vane yelled over the roar of the collapsing stone. "That was a kill shot!" Lyra didn't look surprised. She looked resigned. "I told you, Vane Karsan, I am a fracture in the pattern. My house does not allow fractures to exist." Vane didn't have time to ask what that meant. He saw a dark opening ahead, an old ventilation shaft for a long-abandoned cobalt mine. It was a hole in the world, barely large enough for the skiff. He didn't hesitate. He dived into the darkness, the engine screaming one last time before he cut the power and let the vehicle slide into the cool, silent depths of the earth. They tumbled into the shadows, the skiff coming to a halt against a pile of ancient machinery. Silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine and the ragged breathing of two outcasts. Vane climbed out, his boots clicking on the stone floor. He pulled Lyra up, his hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. They were deep underground now, shielded by millions of tons of mineral-rich rock. Even a Xylari seeker couldn't find them here. "All right," Vane said, his voice echoing in the dark. He pulled a glow rod from his belt and cracked it, filling the space with a pale, ghostly light. "We've got a breather, maybe 2 hours before they start sending ground teams or drones into the tunnels." He sat down on a rusted crate, his rifle across his knees. He looked at Lyra. She was standing in the center of the shaft, her silver hair glowing, her expression unreadable. She looked like a goddess trapped in a tomb. "Talk to me, Lyra, and don't give me that sacred pattern talk," Vane said, his voice hard. "Your people just tried to turn us into a smudge on the canyon floor. Your house wants you dead. Why? If you're a high-born pilot, they should be sending a rescue team, not a demolition squad." Lyra walked toward him, her movements slow and deliberate. She sat on the floor at his feet, her lavender skin shimmering in the glow rod's light. "In your world, Vane, a soldier is a tool. In mine, a warrior is a vessel for the bloodline," she began, her voice low. "I was promised to Lord Varnath of the High Spire, a union of two houses to solidify a reign that has lasted 10,000 years. It was a bond of politics, not of the soul." Vane grunted. "Standard imperial nonsense. So you ran away?" "I did more than run," she whispered. "The ship you found, the one that crashed. It did not fail because of a technical error. I sabotaged the phase drive myself. I chose the crash. I chose the possibility of death over the certainty of a life that was not mine." Vane felt a strange pang in his chest. He thought of his own exit from the military, the accidental discharge, the missing records, the way he had simply walked into the desert and never looked back. "You committed treason," Vane said. "I committed an act of self-definition," Lyra countered, her eyes meeting his. "But in doing so, I shame my house. To them, I am a biological asset that has malfunctioned. And when a tool breaks, you do not fix it. You discard it." Vane looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the strength in her jaw, the sorrow in her eyes, and the defiant tilt of her head. She wasn't an alien princess or a cosmic accident. She was a deserter, just like him. "Well," Vane said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Welcome to the club. The dues are high and the benefits are terrible, but the company isn't half bad." "You still do not understand the depth of the trouble, Vane," Lyra said, her voice trembling slightly. "Because you saved me during the final breath, because of the Oth-Kala, you are no longer a bystander. You are part of the treason. To my house, you are the thief who stole their property. To your people, you are the traitor who hides their prize." Vane stood up and walked to the edge of the darkness, looking toward the tunnel that led back to the surface. He thought about the life he had tried to build. The quiet, the sand, the solitude. It was gone. He was back in the war, but this time, he wasn't fighting for a flag or a paycheck. Let them come, Vane muttered. I've spent 42 years learning how to break things. If they want you, they're going to have to walk over the wreckage of everything I've got left. He turned back to her, and for the first time, he didn't see an alien. He saw a person, a soul that had made a choice. We need to move deeper, he said, offering her his hand. There's an old rail line 3 kilometers down. It leads to the southern plateau. If we can reach the trading post at Black Rock, we might find a way off this rock. Lyra took his hand. As their skin met, the Oth-Kala pulsed, a steady, rhythmic warmth that felt like a second heartbeat. It wasn't a shackle, Vane realized. It was a bridge. One question, Lyra, Vane asked as they began to walk into the gloom. If you sabotaged your ship, why did you wait until you were over Charisma 4? Lyra paused, the silver light reflecting in her eyes. Because of the legend, she whispered. The stories told in the deep nurseries of my world. They say that Charisma was once a garden, and that the people who lived here were our brothers. I didn't come here to die, Vane. I came here to find the family we lost among the stars. Vane didn't answer. He didn't believe in legends, but as they walked through the ancient, hollowed-out bones of the mountain, he couldn't ignore the way the silence seemed to listen to her words, as if the planet itself was waking up to a long-forgotten name. The air in the deeper levels of the cobalt mine was thick with the dust of centuries. Every step Vane and Lyra took sent plumes of gray powder swirling into the air, illuminated by the flickering beams of their flashlights. The silence here was different from the desert above. It was a heavy, pressurized silence, the weight of the mountain pressing down on them with the force of 1,000 atmospheres. Watch your step, Vane whispered, his voice barely audible over the crunch of his boots. These floor plates are old. One bad move and you're taking a 500-meter shortcut to the core. Lyra moved with a ghost-like lightness, her lavender skin seeming to absorb the shadows. The earth here is tired, Vane. I can feel the resonance of the metal. It hums with a frequency of sorrow. Vane snorted, though there was no malice in it. That's not sorrow, Lyra. That's oxidized ore and failing structural supports. Don't go getting poetic on me now. We need to stay sharp. They had been walking for nearly 4 hours. According to Vane's internal compass, they were currently 300 meters below the surface, moving south-southeast toward the old transport tunnels. He kept his ion pulse rifle held at low ready, his finger resting just outside the trigger guard. His military training had kicked in fully now, the combat high that sharpened his senses and narrowed his world down to the next 10 meters of terrain. Sit rep, Vane muttered to himself, a habit from his days in the paratroopers. 2 targets, 1 high-value asset, 0 support, hostile environment. Tactical advantage, none. Odds of survival, low. You speak to yourself as if you are a machine, Lyra observed, walking beside him. In my line of work, being a machine keeps you alive, Vane replied. Emotions are just extra weight you can't afford to carry in a rucksack. And yet you carry that metal box, she said, gesturing to his pack. I can feel the importance you place upon it. It pulses in the link. It is not a tool. It is a memory. Vane went stiff. He didn't like how easily she could read him. The Oth-Kala was a two-way street, and he was realizing that his mental walls, built over decades of trauma, were starting to crumble under the constant, gentle pressure of her presence. It's nothing, he snapped. Just some old things. Let's keep moving. They reached a massive junction where 4 tunnels converged into a central chamber. In the middle sat a rusted mining platform, a leviathan of iron and gears that had been dead for 50 years. Vane climbed onto the platform to survey the area, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. We take the second tunnel on the left, he said, pointing. It should lead us to... He stopped. A faint, high-pitched whine reached his ears. It was so thin it was almost at the edge of human hearing, but he knew that sound. It was the cooling fan of a Mark 7 surveillance drone. Down, Vane hissed, lunging for Lyra. He tackled her behind a heavy iron strut just as a small, silver sphere drifted into the chamber. It was no larger than a grapefruit, but its red optical sensor glowed with a predatory light. It hovered in the center of the room, rotating slowly, scanning for heat signatures. Terran drone, Vane whispered, his mouth inches from Lyra's ear. If it finds us, Thorn will have a platoon down here in 20 mics. Lyra's breath was warm against his neck. She didn't panic. Instead, she closed her eyes. Her skin began to shimmer, a soft, rhythmic glow that pulsed in time with the drone's rotation. "What are you doing?" Vane breathed. "I am matching the frequency of the metal around us," she whispered back. "I am becoming the shadow." Vane watched in disbelief as Lyra's violet skin darkened, the iridescent sheen of her armor fading until she was almost invisible against the rusted iron of the strut. She reached out and touched Vane's hand, and a wave of cold, numbing energy washed over him. He felt his own body heat drop, his heart rate slowing to a crawl. To the drone's infrared sensors, they were nothing more than cold, lifeless metal. The drone hovered for a long minute, its red eye passing over their position 3 times. Then with a soft chirp, it moved on, drifting into the far tunnel. Vane let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He sat back, his heart slowly returning to its normal rhythm. He looked at Lyra, who was slowly returning to her natural lavender hue. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, genuinely impressed. "It is not a learned skill," she said, her voice tired. "It is the song of the skin. All Xylari of the obsidian line can do it, though it drains the life force. It is a defense for the weak." "Didn't look weak to me," Vane said. He stood up and checked the tunnel where the drone had disappeared. "We can't stay on the main pass. If they've got drones in the shafts, they've already mapped the primary routes." He looked at the mining platform. Beneath the main deck was a narrow maintenance crawl space, choked with old cables and debris. It was a miserable way to travel, but it was invisible from the air. "This way," he said, gesturing to the hole. "It's going to be tight, and it's going to be filthy." "I have already survived a crash into a sea of rust, Vane Karsan," Lyra said, a faint, playful spark in her starlight eyes. "A little dirt will not break me." They crawled through the cramped space for what felt like hours. The air was thin and metallic, and the jagged edges of the machinery tore at their clothes. Vane led the way, his large frame barely fitting through the narrow gaps. He could hear Lyra behind him, her breathing steady, her movements controlled. Finally, the crawl space opened into a small circular room. An old foreman's office perched on a ledge overlooking a vast, dark cavern. It was dry and relatively clean, with a heavy steel door that could be bolted from the inside. "We stop here," Vane said, dropping his pack. "We need to eat and rest. If we push any further without sleep, we'll start making mistakes." He pulled out 2 ration bars and a canteen of recycled water. He handed one to Lyra, who took it with a nod of thanks. They sat in silence for a while, the only light coming from the low-power setting of the glow rod. "Vane," Lyra said after she had finished her meal, "tell me of the box." Vane sighed. He knew she wouldn't let it go. He reached into his pack and pulled out the small metal container. He opened it, revealing a few faded photographs, a tarnished silver medal, and a small, hand-carved wooden bird. "My mother carved this," Vane said, picking up the bird. "She lived in a colony on Mars. She used to say that birds were the only things that truly understood what it meant to be free. They don't have borders. They don't have commanders. They just fly." He ran a thumb over the smooth wood. "The medal, that was for bravery during the siege of Orion. It's a piece of tin they give you for watching your friends die and not running away. And the photos, well, they're people who aren't around anymore." Lyra leaned in, her eyes reflecting the pale light. "You carry your ghosts with you." "Everyone does," Vane said, snapping the box shut. "Some people just hide them better than others." "Why did you leave them? Your people? Your army?" Vane looked at the steel door, his expression darkening. "Because I realized I was fighting for the wrong side of the truth. We were supposed to be liberating the colonies, but all we were doing was replacing one set of chains with another. One day I was told to fire on a civilian transport because it was carrying contraband. I looked at the sensor feed and I saw faces. Children. Old men. I didn't pull the trigger. My CO did it for me, then blamed me for the delay that let the ship get into range." He stood up, his voice tight with a decade-old rage. "I realized then that the pattern they wanted me to follow was a lie. So I broke it." Lyra stood up too, her hand reaching out to touch his chest, right over his heart. The Oth-Kala flared, a sudden, intense burst of heat that made Vane gasp. It wasn't just warmth this time. It was a connection, a shared understanding of loss and defiance. You and I, Vane Karsan, we are more alike than the stars intended, she whispered. We are both pieces of a larger design that refuse to fit into the frame. Vane looked down at her. In the dim light of the mine, surrounded by the ruins of a forgotten world, he felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in 10 years, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a man who had something to protect. Suddenly, the floor beneath them shuddered. A deep, resonant boom echoed through the cavern, the sound of a high-yield explosive. They're blasting the tunnels, Vane said, grabbing his rifle. Thorn isn't waiting for the drones. He's going to collapse the whole sector to flush us out. No, Lyra said, her eyes fixed on the door. It is not the humans. Listen. Through the thick steel of the door, a new sound emerged. It wasn't the roar of an explosion, but a rhythmic, metallic clicking, like the sound of 1,000 glass needles hitting the stone. It was accompanied by a low-frequency hum that made the air itself feel heavy and thick. A purge squad, Lyra whispered, her face going pale. The House Obsidian has sent the Faceless? Vane didn't know what the Faceless were, but the way Lyra said the name made the hair on his neck stand up. He moved to the door and looked through the small, reinforced viewing port. In the hallway outside, 3 figures moved through the shadows. They were tall, impossibly thin, and clad in armor that seemed to be made of liquid obsidian. They had no eyes, no mouths, just smooth, black surfaces where faces should be. They moved with a synchronized mechanical precision, their weapons, long, vibrating blades of purple light, cutting through the air with a terrifying hiss. They are the executors of the bloodline, Lyra said, her voice trembling. They do not feel, they do not negotiate, they only conclude. Vane looked at the door, then back at the small ventilation grate in the corner of the room. It was too small for him, but maybe... Lyra, get in the vent, Vane ordered, his voice flat. What? No, we are bonded. Listen to me. Vane grabbed her shoulders, his eyes fierce. They're here for you. If you stay here, they'll kill us both. If you get in the vent, you can reach the lower shafts. I'll hold them here. Vane, the Oth-Kala. If you die, a part of me dies with you. Vane gave her a small, sad smile, the first real smile he had shown her. Then don't let me die. Keep moving. I'll be right behind you. I just need to remind these black-suited freaks why you don't mess with a Terran paratrooper. He shoved her toward the vent. Lyra hesitated, her eyes filled with a desperate, glowing light. Then with a sharp nod, she scrambled into the opening, her silver hair disappearing into the darkness. Vane turned back to the door. He took a deep breath, adjusted the setting on his ion pulse rifle to maximum discharge, and braced his feet against the floor. All right, you faceless bastards, Vane growled as the first obsidian blade began to melt through the steel door. Let's see how you handle a man with nothing left to lose. The door exploded inward in a shower of sparks and molten metal. Vane didn't wait. He pulled the trigger, and the room was filled with the roar of human defiance, echoing through the deep, silent heart of Charisma 4. The explosion in the foreman's office was not a clean one. Vane had rigged his remaining thermite charges to the main cobalt feeder, creating a localized inferno that burned at 3,000 degrees. It was meant to be a wall of fire, a temporary barrier to buy Lyra time. But the Faceless did not care about the laws of thermodynamics. As the smoke cleared, Vane saw one of the obsidian-clad assassins walking through the white-hot flames, its liquid armor rippling like a black pond under a heavy rain. You've got to be kidding me, Vane growled, his voice a dry rasp. He didn't waste another second. He fired a 3-round burst from his ion pulse rifle. The blue bolt slammed into the assassin's chest, the energy dissipating into the dark material with a dull thud. The Faceless didn't even stumble. It raised its light blade, the purple edge humming with a frequency that made Vane's teeth ache. Listen, Sparky, I don't know what they pay you, but it's not enough to deal with me, Vane said, backing toward the service lift. He was bleeding from a shrapnel nick on his forehead, the red blood blurring his vision. The assassin moved. It was a blur of black motion, faster than any human Vane had ever fought. He barely managed to bring his rifle up to parry the first strike. The light blade sheared through the barrel of his weapon as if it were made of warm butter. Vane dropped the useless scrap and dived into the lift, slamming his fist against the emergency descent button. The lift dropped with a sickening lurch, falling 200 meters in a matter of seconds. Vane hit the floor hard, his shoulder popping with a wet click. He gritted his teeth, refusing to scream. He had been through worse extractions in the Orion sector. This was just another Tuesday in a long career of bad luck. He stumbled out into the lower transport tunnels, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He needed to find Lyra. The Oth-Kala link was pulsing in his chest, a steady rhythmic heat that told him she was still alive, still moving south. "Hang on, kid," he whispered, clutching his dislocated shoulder. "I'm coming for you." He moved through the dark for 40 minutes, guided only by the faint, internal tug of the bond. It was an eerie sensation, like a compass needle made of fire. He found her at the edge of the southern plateau, where the mine tunnels opened into a vast underground hangar. Lyra was standing near an old cargo hauler, her silver hair illuminated by the bioluminescent fungi that grew on the damp walls. When she saw him, her starlight eyes flared with a mix of relief and terror. "Vane Karsan!" She rushed to him, her hands hovering over his injured shoulder. "The link?" It went dark for a moment. "I thought you were lost to the void." "Takes more than a few shadow puppets to put me down," Vane said, though his face was pale. "But my rifle's junk. We're officially out of heavy ordnance. The faceless? I bought us some distance, but they aren't dead. Those things are made of something I don't understand." Vane looked at the cargo hauler. It was an ancient six-wheeled beast, designed to carry tons of ore across the Rust Sea. It looked like a museum piece, but the tires were still solid and the battery indicators showed a quarter charge. "This is our ticket out of here. If we can get this thing moving, we can reach the trading post at Black Rock by midnight." Lyra helped him pop his shoulder back into place, a sickening crunch that made Vane see stars. And then they scrambled into the hauler's cab. The engine groaned as Vane engaged the starter, a deep, mechanical cough that echoed through the hangar. After 3 tries, the motor roared to life, a steady, thrumming vibration that felt like a heartbeat. They burst out of the hangar and into the open desert of the Rust Sea. The landscape was a nightmare of red iron and jagged glass. Massive dunes, some 500 meters high, shifted in the wind like slow-moving waves. Above them, the green sky was beginning to churn with the first signs of a surge storm. Lightning, tinted violet by the atmospheric gases, danced between the clouds. "This is the heart of the waste," Vane said, his hands steady on the massive steering wheel. "The interference here is thick enough to scramble a dropship's sensors. If we can stay in the valleys, we might lose Thorne's drones." "And the faceless?" Lyra asked, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "They'll have to walk," Vane said grimly, "and even they have to deal with the sandworms." As they drove, the silence between them became heavy. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the crushing weight of their situation. Vane could feel Lyra's anxiety through the link. It was a cold, sharp sensation, like a needle pressing against his ribs. "Vane," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. "Why did you come back for me, in the room with the steel door? You could have stayed in the vent. You could have let the pattern break." Vane didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the shifting red sand. "I told you, I don't like seeing things burn." "That is a lie," Lyra said, her voice firm. "You are a man of logic and scars. You knew the risk. You knew that protecting me would destroy the life you built here. Yet you stood before the executors of my house as if you were a god of war." Vane tightened his grip on the wheel. "Maybe I was tired of being alone, Lyra. Maybe I wanted to see if I could still save one thing that didn't have a serial number on it." "Ah." Lyra turned toward him, her lavender skin glowing softly in the dim light of the cab. "In my world, we are taught that blood is the only truth. We are born into houses, we serve our kin, and we die for the glory of the lineage. We do not choose our paths. The pattern is woven before we take our first breath." "Sounds like a prison to me," Vane grunted. "It was," she whispered, "until I crashed, until I saw you standing in the fire. Not because you had to, but because you chose to. You have shown me something, Vane Karsan, a heresy that is more beautiful than any law." Vane glanced at her, and for a moment the storm outside didn't seem so dark. "Yeah, well, don't go making me a hero yet. We're still 300 kilometers from anything resembling safety, and I'm pretty sure I left my favorite coffee mug in that hut." Lyra smiled, a small, genuine tilt of the lips that made her starlight eyes shimmer. I will buy you a new one. 100 coffee mugs if we survive this. The moment was broken by a sudden, violent jolt. The hauler skidded sideways as a massive shape erupted from the sand in front of them. It was a charisma sandworm, a 60-meter-long tube of muscle and armored plates, its mouth a whirling vortex of crystalline teeth. Hold on, Vane shouted, slamming the hauler into high gear. The beast roared, a sound that vibrated through the very chassis of the vehicle. It lunged, its massive head slamming into the side of the hauler. Metal groaned and sparked. Vane fought the wheel, his muscles straining as he tried to keep the vehicle upright. Lyra, the secondary battery, give it a full discharge. Lyra dived for the control panel, her fingers dancing across the ancient switches. I do not know the settings. Red toggle. 3 clicks to the right. Now. She slammed the switch. A massive arc of blue electricity surged from the hauler's exterior plates, striking the worm in its sensitive underbelly. The creature convulsed, a spray of black ichor hitting the windshield, and retreated back into the depths of the sand. Vane didn't slow down. He pushed the hauler until the engine was screaming in protest, racing away from the kill zone. You okay? He panted, his chest heaving. Lyra was leaning against the dashboard, her breathing shallow. She didn't answer. Her hand was pressed against her lower abdomen, and her skin had turned a pale, sickly shade of lilac. Lyra? Vane reached out, his heart suddenly hammering. Through the Oth-Kala, he felt it. It wasn't the cold needle of anxiety anymore. It was something else. A pulse. A deep, resonant thrumming that felt like a bell ringing in a cathedral. It was ancient, powerful, and utterly impossible. Vane, she whispered, her eyes wide with a terror he had never seen before. Something is happening. The pattern, it's changing. He pulled the hauler to a stop in the shadow of a massive iron ridge. He turned to her, his hands trembling as he reached for his medkit. But as he looked at her, he realized that no human medicine could explain what he was seeing. Beneath the translucent skin of her stomach, a soft golden light was beginning to pulse. It was in perfect synchronization with his own heartbeat. The turning point had arrived, not in a flurry of bullets or a crash of ships, but in the silent, glowing truth of a life that shouldn't exist. The interior of the cargo hauler was cramped, smelling of ozone and old dust. But to Vane, it suddenly felt like the center of the universe. He had spent the last 20 minutes trying to make sense of the readings on his portable bioscanner. The device, a rugged, military-grade unit, was chirping with a series of error codes that Vane had never seen in 20 years of service. Hardware failure, Vane muttered, shaking the scanner. It's gotta be. The iron in the sand is messing with the sensors. Seskununum. Lyra lay on the bench seat, her head resting on a rolled-up tarp. The golden glow beneath her skin had settled into a steady, rhythmic throb. She looked exhausted, her silver hair damp with sweat, but there was a strange, haunting calm in her eyes. It is not the machine, Vane, she said softly. The machine is seeing the truth. My body is no longer just mine. Vane sat back on his heels, the scanner falling from his hand. He looked at the lavender woman, then at the glowing pulse in her abdomen. Lyra, we've been together for, 72 hours? Human biology doesn't work like this. Xylari biology doesn't work like this. It's impossible. The Oth-Kala is not biology, she whispered. It is the convergence of two patterns. When you saved me, when you chose to bind your life to mine, you didn't just fulfill a law. You ignited a spark. Our people, we were once the same, Vane. Thousands of years ago, before the Great Divide, we were a single race. The bond is not a marriage. It is a reunification. Vane rubbed his face with his calloused hands. You're telling me that because I dragged you out of a fire, we've created a bridge between two species that haven't spoken in 10 millennia? A bridge that carries life, she said. The weight of her words hit Vane like a physical blow. He thought of his mother's wooden bird, the symbol of freedom. He thought of the war he had run away from, the lives he had taken, and the silent desert he had chosen as his grave. He had come to Charisma 4 to die slowly, to fade away into the red dust. Instead, he had somehow become the architect of something entirely new. Thorn will kill for this, Vane said, his voice a low growl. If the Terran command finds out that a human and a Xylari that they can produce something like this, they'll turn this planet into a laboratory. They won't see a child. They'll see a weapon, a political tool. And my house, Lyra added, her voice trembling. To them, this is the ultimate blasphemy, a dilution of the obsidian blood. They will stop at nothing to erase us. Vane stood up, the roof of the cab pressing against his head. He felt a sudden, fierce protectiveness, a rage that was different from the cold anger of a soldier. This was the instinct of a father, a role he had never dared to dream of. They won't get near you, Vane said, his voice cracking with intensity. I don't care about patterns or bloodlines. This is a choice. We chose to save each other. That makes this ours, not the house's, not the command's. He walked to the back of the hauler and began rummaging through his rucksack. He pulled out a small, encrypted comms unit, one he had stolen from a supply depot 5 years ago. What are you doing? Lyra asked. Calling in a favor, Vane said. There's a man at the Black Rock trading post, an old smuggler named Jax. He owes me his life from a scrap in the Rim Worlds. If anyone can get us a ship and a clean set of IDs, it's him. He tapped out a series of codes, the screen flickering with static. After a long minute, a grainy image appeared on the display. It was a man with a face like a crumpled map, one eye replaced by a crude cybernetic lens. Vane, the man rasped, his voice sounding like gravel in a blender. I thought you were dead, you old war dog. Last I heard, you were playing hermit in the Rust Sea. Change of plans, Jax, Vane said, his voice tight. I need a lift. Off-world. No questions, no logs, and I need it yesterday. Jax leaned in, his cybernetic eye whirring as it zoomed in on Vane's face. You look like hell, Vane. And you've got that, I'm about to start a galactic incident look in your eyes. Who's the cargo? Vane glanced at Lyra. She was watching him, her starlight eyes full of trust. She's family, Jax. The only family I've got left. Jax went silent for a moment. He looked at the background of the hauler, the red sand outside, and the tension in Vane's shoulders. 30,000 credits. That's the price for a ghost run to the neutral zones. I don't have 30,000, Vane said. I've got 10,000 in old marks and a box of Xylari tech that'll make your head spin. Keep the tech, Jax said, a crooked grin appearing on his face. If you're actually calling me after 10 years, it means the world is ending. Meet me at the landing pad behind the Black Rock Cantina in 6 hours. If you're late, I'm gone. The screen went black. Vane turned to Lyra. We've got 6 hours to cross 200 kilometers of the most hostile terrain on the planet. We need to move. They climbed back into the driver's seat. As Vane engaged the gears, he felt a sudden sharp pain in his chest. It wasn't the bond. It was a signal. Vane, Lyra gasped, clutching his arm. The neural lace. It's screaming. High above them, the green clouds parted. Not for the storm, but for the arrival of something massive. A Xylari carrier, the Shard of Dawn, was descending from orbit. It was a 5-kilometer-long mountain of obsidian and light, its hull bristling with weapon arrays that could glass a continent. They found us, Vane whispered. How? We're in the middle of the interference zone. The pulse, Lyra said, her voice filled with despair. The child. Its resonance is so pure, it's like a beacon in the dark. They aren't tracking our ship, Vane. They're tracking the life inside me. The carrier didn't fire. Instead, it released a swarm of smaller craft, razor-shaped interceptors that began to circle their position like vultures. At the same time, the horizon behind them began to glow with the headlights of Terran APCs. Commander Thorne hadn't given up. He had tracked the energy surge from Vane's thermite explosion and had been following their trail ever since. They were caught between two empires in the middle of a desert that wanted to swallow them whole. Vane, what do we do? Lyra asked, her hand trembling as she touched the glowing pulse in her side. Vane looked at the massive obsidian ship above, then at the dust clouds of the approaching human army. He looked at Lyra, the lavender woman who had given him a reason to live, and the impossible light that represented a future he hadn't known was possible. He felt the fear, the cold, suffocating dread of a man who knows he is outgunned and outmatched. But beneath the fear, there was something else. the humanistic truth he had been running from his whole life. Family isn't what you're born into. It's what you're willing to die for. We don't run, Vane said, his voice as steady as the iron mountains around them. He reached into his rucksack and pulled out his last remaining weapon, a tactical signal flare. We make them talk to each other. They will only fight, Lyra said. Exactly, Vane said, a dangerous glint in his eyes. If we can't hide, we'll start a war. And in the middle of a war, nobody notices two ghosts slipping out the back door. He slammed his foot on the accelerator. The hauler roared, its tires throwing up massive plumes of red sand as it raced toward the center of the valley, directly between the two approaching forces. Vane, this is madness. No, Lyra, Vane said, glancing at her with a grin that was half mad and all soldier. This is the paratrooper way. We jump into the middle of the mess and find a way out while everyone else is busy shouting. As the first shots from the Terran APCs rang out and the Xylari interceptors began their dive runs, Vane grabbed Lyra's hand. The Oth-Kala flared, a blinding white light that filled the cab, linking their minds, their hearts, and the impossible life between them. The turning point had passed. Now there was only the fire. The valley of the Rust Sea became a pressure cooker of conflicting technologies. On one side, the Terran siege walkers crested the dunes, their massive hydraulic legs churning up red sand like prehistoric beasts. On the other, the Xylari interceptors screamed overhead in a tight, silent formation, their obsidian hulls absorbing the dim green light of the atmosphere. In the middle, the cargo hauler sat like a discarded toy, a tiny metal box containing the greatest heresy in the history of the stars. Vane clamped his hand over his signal flare, his thumb hovering over the ignition. Through the Oth-Kala link, he could feel Lyra's heart hammering, a fast, erratic rhythm that mirrored his own. But beneath her fear was the steady golden thrum of the impossible pulse. The child was silent now, as if sensing the storm outside. They aren't going to talk, Vane, Lyra whispered, her eyes fixed on the massive Xylari carrier descending from the clouds. They are going to erase the question before anyone has time to ask it. Then we make the question too loud to ignore, Vane said. He slammed his thumb down. The flare didn't just go up. It exploded in a blinding pillar of white phosphorus and encoded electronic noise. It was a military-grade distress beacon, a scream in the darkness that hit every sensor array on every ship in the vicinity. It was the universal signal for a catastrophic core breach, the kind of lie that forces everyone to pause or risk being caught in the fallout. For 3 seconds, the valley went silent. Contact! Multiple bogies! All units! Weapons free! The Terran comms channel erupted in Vane's ear. Vane Karsan! They are engaging! Lyra shouted. A volley of railgun slugs from the Terran walkers tore through the air, hitting the leading Xylari interceptors. The Xylari responded with beams of violet light that turned the sand into pools of bubbling glass. The chaos Vane had hoped for arrived with a vengeance. The air became a solid wall of heat and noise, a symphony of destruction that shook the hauler to its bolts. Vane slammed the hauler into gear, weaving through the crossfire. He wasn't trying to outrun them anymore. He was trying to reach the shadow of a massive iron monolith at the edge of the valley. If they could get under the overhang, they might survive the initial wave of the orbital bombardment he knew was coming. Suddenly, the world turned white. It wasn't an explosion. It was a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The screams of the railguns stopped. The violet beams vanished. The very wind seemed to freeze in place. Vane looked through the cracked windshield and saw a third ship. It was ancient. It was a miles-long cathedral of pale, ivory-colored stone and shifting geometry, appearing from a fold in space that shouldn't have been there. It didn't have engines or weapons. It drifted like a ghost, casting a shadow that covered the entire valley, human and alien alike. The matriarch, Lyra whispered, her voice trembling with a reverence that bordered on terror. The keeper of voids. A voice didn't reach their ears. It reached their souls. It was a resonance that bypassed language, a deep, ancient vibration that made the Oth-Kala link flare with a blinding brilliance. Enough, the voice said. From the ivory ship, a beam of soft, pearlescent light descended, wrapping around the hauler and lifting it into the air. Vane felt the sensation of weightlessness, the roar of the desert fading into a hum of pure energy. He reached for Lyra, his hand finding hers in the white light. Their fingers interlocked, the bond between them glowing with a golden fire that matched the pulse in her womb. They were being pulled into the heart of the ivory ship, leaving the war and the dust behind. The interior of the matriarch's vessel was not a ship at all. It was a vast open space that looked like a garden made of crystallized starlight. Transparent floors overlooked the void of space, and trees with leaves made of silver fire grew from mounds of glowing soil. At the center of the garden stood a figure, tall, draped in robes of woven nebula, her face a shifting mask of 1,000 different ages. The matriarch. Vane stepped off the transport platform, his boots making no sound on the starlight floor. He kept his arm around Lyra, his body acting as a shield even here, in the presence of a godlike entity. He was a soldier, and his instinct was to look for the exit, but there were no doors, only the stars. "You carry a bridge, daughter of obsidian," the matriarch said, her eyes, if they could be called eyes, fixing on Lyra's abdomen. "And you, son of Earth, you carry the catalyst." "We just want to survive," Vane said, his voice sounding small in the vastness of the chamber. "My people and her people. They're out there killing each other over something they don't understand. They kill because they have forgotten the root," the matriarch said, moving toward them with a grace that made Vane's head swim. 10,000 years ago, the Great Divide split the primordial flame. One half took to the machines and the cold logic of the stars, becoming the Xylari. The other half was cast down to a blue world of water and fire, forgotten and left to evolve in the dirt. "You call yourselves different species. You are but two branches of the same dying tree." Vane felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You're saying humans and Xylari, we're the same? That's impossible. Our DNA, our blood is a story written by the environment," the matriarch countered. "But the soul is the ink. The child you have created is not a hybrid, Vane Karsan. It is a return. It is the original pattern, reborn for the first time since the stars went cold." Lyra looked at Vane, her starlight eyes overflowing with tears. "The legends were true. We weren't finding brothers, Vane. We were finding ourselves." "But they won't see it that way," Vane said, his jaw tightening. "Thorn and the House Obsidian. They'll see this child as a threat to their purity, to their control. They'll destroy it to keep their lies alive." "Then you must prove that the choice is stronger than the lie," the matriarch said. She raised a hand, and the stars around them began to spin. "The bond you share, the Oth-Kala, is a trial of the spirit, but it is not yet complete. To protect what you have created, you must face the trial of the twin suns. You must look into the heart of your own shadows and decide if you are truly willing to be the father of a new world." "I've already made my choice," Vane said. "Have you?" The matriarch's voice turned sharp, like a blade of ice. "You chose to run from your war. You chose to hide in the sand. But to save this child, you must walk back into the fire. You must accept that your life is no longer your own, not because of a law, but because of a love that demands everything." The garden vanished. Vane found himself standing alone in a void of black glass. Lyra was gone. The matriarch was gone. There was only the sound of his own breathing and the distant haunting echo of a civilian transport screaming as it fell from the sky. The trial had begun. The black glass beneath Vane's feet wasn't solid. It was a liquid memory, shifting and rippling with every step he took. He looked down and saw his own reflection, but it wasn't the man he was now. It was the man he had been 10 years ago, clad in the charcoal gray armor of a Terran paratrooper, his face clean-shaven and cold, his eyes devoid of the light he had found in the desert. "This again," Vane whispered, his voice echoing in the void. "I've lived this every night for a decade. You want to show me my ghosts? I know their names. I know their faces." "Do you?" a voice asked. It was his own voice, but it sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. A door appeared in the darkness, the hatch of an orbital drop pod. Vane knew what was on the other side. He didn't want to open it, but his hand moved of its own accord, drawn by a force he couldn't resist. He pulled the lever, and the world exploded into the chaos of the siege of Orion. He was back in the cockpit of a gunship. The sensors were screaming, red lights flashing across the console. Below him, a sprawling colony city was burning, and a massive civilian transport was attempting to lift off from the starport. "Target confirmed," a voice crackled in his helmet. It was his old commanding officer, Silas Thorne. "Vane, the transport is carrying insurgent leaders. They're using the civilians as shields. Take the shot." "Sir, there are thousands of non-combatants on that ship," the younger Vane said, his voice steady but his hands trembling on the controls. "That's an order, soldier. Take the shot or you're looking at a court-martial for treason. Do your duty to Earth." In the reality of the past, Vane had hesitated, and Thorne had remotely triggered the weapons from the command center. But in the trial, the controls were in Vane's hands. The crosshairs were locked onto the transport's engine housing. One squeeze of the trigger, and the problem would be solved. "Is this the choice?" Vane shouted at the darkness. "You want me to kill them again? Or you want me to fail and let the insurgents go? It's a rigged game." "The game is not about the ship," the voice of the matriarch whispered from the shadows. "The game is about the man who holds the trigger. Who do you serve, Vane Karsan? The blood of your tribe, or the life in your hands?" Vane looked at the screen. He saw the faces of the people on the transport, scared, desperate, human. And then the image shifted. For a split second, he didn't see a human child in the window of the transport. He saw a lavender-skinned girl with starlight eyes. He saw his child. Vane let go of the controls. He sat back, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I won't do it. Not then, not now. If that makes me a traitor, then I'm a traitor. I'm done serving the machine." The gunship dissolved into mist. The screaming stopped. Vane was back in the void of black glass. But he wasn't alone this time. A figure stood 10 paces away. A man in obsidian armor, his face hidden by a smooth, faceless mask. It was the executor of House Obsidian, the one Vane had fought in the mine. "You speak of choices, human," the assassin said, his voice a cold vibration. "But your choice has brought death to my house. You have stolen a vessel. You have defiled a lineage that has lasted for 10,000 years. For the crime of the Oth-Kala, the penalty is erasure." The assassin raised his light blade, the purple edge humming with lethal intent. "I didn't steal anything," Vane said, his voice low and dangerous. He didn't have a rifle. He didn't have a knife. But he felt a weight in his hand, the wooden bird his mother had carved. He gripped it tight, the wood smooth and warm. "I saved a woman who wanted to be free. If your lineage can't handle that, then your lineage deserves to die." The assassin lunged. Vane didn't move. He stood his ground, his eyes fixed on the black surface of the mask. As the blade descended, Vane didn't feel fear. He felt a surge of golden warmth from the Oth-Kala link. It was Lyra's strength, her defiance, her love. The blade struck Vane's chest, but it didn't cut. It shattered like glass against a wall of golden energy. "The blood is a lie," Vane whispered, his voice echoing with the power of the bond. "The choice is the only truth." The assassin vanished. The black glass floor cracked, and Vane fell into a sea of white light. He woke up on the starlight floor of the matriarch's garden. Lyra was there, kneeling beside him, her hands on his face. Her skin was glowing with a vibrant, healthy amethyst light, and her eyes were full of a joy that made Vane's breath catch. "You did it," she whispered. "The trial. It is finished." Vane sat up, his body feeling lighter, as if a decade of lead had been lifted from his heart. He looked at his hands. They were steady. The ghosts were still there, but they weren't screaming anymore. They were just part of the story. "You have passed the trial of the twin suns," the matriarch said, appearing beside them. "You have looked into the darkness of both worlds and chosen the light between them. The Oth-Kala is no longer a law of the Xylari. It is a covenant of the new root." She looked out at the stars where the Terran and Xylari fleets were still locked in a stalemate, paralyzed by the presence of her ship. "But the world outside is not as wise as you, Vane Karsan," she continued. "They still hunger for the control they have lost. They will not let you walk away with the bridge you carry." "What do we do?" Vane asked, standing up and pulling Lyra with him. "I cannot fight your war for you," the matriarch said. "I am a keeper of patterns, not a soldier of the flesh. But I can give you the tools to speak to them. The child you carry, it is not just a life. It is a frequency. It is the original song of the stars. If you can broadcast that song, if you can make them hear the truth of their own origins, the war will end." "How?" Lyra asked. "The Charisma Spire," the matriarch said, pointing to the planet below, "the ancient relay station at the North Pole. It was built by the first ones to communicate with the entire galaxy. If you can reach the spire and activate the primordial pulse, every mind on every ship will hear the song. The lies of the command and the house will be stripped away." Vane looked at the planet. The North Pole was a wasteland of ice and electromagnetic storms, guarded by the most advanced automated defenses on the planet. To get there, they would have to fly through the middle of two fleets that wanted them dead. "Sounds like a suicide mission," Vane said, a grim smile touching his lips. "For a soldier, perhaps," the matriarch said. "But for a father, it is merely a walk to the nursery." She raised her hand, and a small, sleek vessel, shaped like a drop pod but made of the same ivory stone as her ship, appeared on the platform. "This is the Icarus-Va," the matriarch said. "It is fast, it is silent, and it is yours. Go, children of the same spark. Save the future you have created." Vane looked at Lyra. She nodded, her silver hair shimmering in the starlight. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was a warrior of the new route. "Let's go," Vane said, his voice hard and focused. "We've got a world to wake up." As they stepped into the ivory ship, Vane felt the Oth-Kala link pulse one last time, a steady golden beat that told him everything he needed to know. He wasn't a machine. He wasn't a deserter. He was a man who had chosen his family, and for that family he would move the stars themselves. They launched from the matriarch's vessel, a streak of white light cutting through the violet fire of the battlefield, heading toward the frozen north. The war for Charisma 4 was about to change, not with a bang, but with a song that had been waiting 10,000 years to be sung. The Icarus-Va descended toward the northern pole of Charisma 4 like a falling star of ivory and gold. Outside the cockpit, the atmosphere was no longer green or violet. It was a screaming white void. The electromagnetic storms of the polar cap were legendary among the few prospectors who had dared to scout the region. They called it the Ghost Wall, a place where compasses spun in circles and electronic sensors went to die. Inside the small, sleek cabin, Vane Karsan gripped the flight controls. The ivory material of the ship felt warm beneath his palms, pulsing in synchronization with his own heartbeat. Beside him, Lyra-Va was curled in the co-pilot's seat, her hands pressed firmly against her abdomen. The golden glow from her womb was so bright now it illuminated the entire cabin, casting long, rhythmic shadows against the crystalline walls. "Sit rep, Lyra," Vane muttered, his voice tight with the strain of fighting the atmospheric turbulence. "How close are they?" Lyra closed her eyes, her neural lace twitching beneath her translucent skin. "The Terran fleet has broken through the Ghost Wall. Commander Thorne is leading a squadron of 5 interceptors. They are 5 minutes behind us. The Xylari, Lord Varnath's ship, is further out, but they are preparing an orbital strike. They don't want to capture the spire, Vane. They want to bury it under 10 kilometers of ice." "Typical brass," Vane growled. "If you can't own the toy, break it so nobody else can play." A massive jolt rocked the ship. A proximity alarm, sounding more like a melodic chime than a siren, echoed through the cabin. A railgun slug from one of the Terran interceptors had grazed their rear stabilizers. "We're taking heat. Hang on!" Vane banked the Icarus-Va into a steep dive, plunging into a canyon of solid blue ice. The canyon walls were jagged and narrow, providing just enough cover to scramble the Terran targeting locks. Vane flew by instinct, his eyes locked on the holographic map the matriarch had burned into his mind. He wasn't a pilot by trade, but he had spent 20 years in the belly of dropships, watching the way the world blurred during a hot landing. He knew how to find the gaps in the fire. "There it is," Lyra whispered, pointing through the blizzard. Rising out of the ice like a jagged tooth was the Charisma Spire. It was a monolithic structure of dark, iridescent metal, covered in geometric runes that glowed with a faint, dormant silver light. It was miles high, its tip disappearing into the swirling vortex of the polar storm. It looked less like a building and more like a needle designed to stitch the planet back to the stars. "I'm putting us down at the base," Vane said. "Once we're out, you head for the primary relay. I'll hold the door." "Vane, the Oth-Kala, if we are separated—" "We aren't separating," Vane interrupted. glancing at her with a fierce, protective light in his eyes. "We're just dividing the labor. You're the architect. I'm the demolition man. We do this for the kid, remember?" He slammed the landing thrusters. The Icarus vase skidded across the ice, coming to a halt at the base of the spire's massive entrance. Even before the hatch opened, Vane could hear the roar of the Terran dropships descending behind them. They scrambled out into the biting cold. The temperature was 60 degrees below zero, the wind whipping red dust and ice crystals against their faces. Vane raised his improvised shield, a piece of the Icarus Va's hull, and leveled his last working sidearm. "Go, get inside!" he shouted. Lyra didn't hesitate. She ran for the runes, her hand touching the ancient metal. The spire groaned, a deep, resonant sound like a waking giant, and a seam opened in the dark metal. She slipped inside, her lavender skin a stark contrast to the obsidian walls. Vane turned toward the horizon. 5 Terran Valkyrie dropships were hovering just 200 meters away, their spotlights cutting through the whiteout. Armed soldiers in thermal combat gear began to rappel down, their rifles fixed on the lone man standing in the snow. At the center of the formation stood a figure in an officer's long coat, his face hidden behind a gold-tinted visor. Commander Silas Thorne. "Monroe, or should I call you Karsan now?" Thorne's voice boomed over the loudspeaker, amplified by the storm. "You've led us on a hell of a chase, soldier, but this is the end of the line. Hand over the Xylari asset and the tech, and maybe I'll let a court-martial decide if you live." Vane spit into the snow, the moisture freezing before it hit the ground. "She's not an asset, Thorne, and the tech doesn't belong to you. It's time you stopped acting like the universe is your personal supply depot." "You were always a sentimental fool, Vane," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think one man and a pregnant alien can change 10,000 years of history? You're a bug on a windshield. All units, move in." "Secure the spire. Lethal force authorized on the traitor." Vane didn't run. He took a knee behind a ridge of ice, his heart beating a steady rhythmic cadence. He wasn't the machine anymore. He was a father protecting a nursery. The first wave of soldiers rushed forward, their pulse rifles spitting orange fire. Vane returned fire, his shots precise and cold, picking off the lead scouts not to kill, but to disable. He didn't want more blood on his hands, not today. He wanted to break the chain. "Vane," Lyra's voice echoed in his mind through the link. "I have reached the core, but it requires a biological key. It needs the primordial pulse. I cannot do this alone." "I'm a bit busy, Lyra," Vane shouted, ducking as a grenade exploded nearby, showering him in ice shards. "The bond, Vane. You must focus. You are the other half of the key. Your choice is the spark." Vane closed his eyes for a split second, ignoring the screams and the gunfire. He reached out with his mind, searching for that golden thread of warmth. He found it, deep in the center of the storm. He felt Lyra's hand, he felt the child's heartbeat, and he felt something else, a sudden, overwhelming realization that he wasn't just a man from Earth. He was a piece of a larger story that had been waiting for this moment to be told. The spire began to hum. The silver runes flared into brilliant white light, a shock wave of pure energy rippling outward from the base. The Terran soldiers were knocked off their feet, their electronics sparking and dying in the surge. High above, the Xylari carrier Shard of Dawn prepared its main cannon. Lord Varnath, watching from the bridge, saw the spire ignite. He didn't see a miracle. He saw a threat to his house's purity. "Fire," Varnath ordered. A beam of violet energy, wide enough to swallow a city, shot down from orbit. It was meant to erase the spire and everything around it. But as the beam hit the upper atmosphere, the spire responded. A pillar of white light erupted from the tip of the monolith, meeting the violet beam in midair. The collision didn't create an explosion, it created a ripple. The white light consumed the violet energy, transforming it, weaving it into a song that began to play in the minds of every living soul on Charisma 4. It was the primordial pulse. It wasn't a sound, it was a memory. Vane felt it first. He saw visions of a lush, green world where humans and Xylari walked together under 2 suns. He felt the sorrow of the Great Divide, the fear that had driven them apart, and the long, cold centuries of loneliness. He saw Thorne's face, not as a commander, but as a scared boy who had been taught to hate to stay safe. He saw Varnath as a man trapped in a prison of his own bloodline. The soldiers dropped their weapons. Thorn fell to his knees, his visor shattering as he clutched his head. The Xylari pilots in the sky veered away, their interceptors glowing with the same silver light as the spire. In that moment, the war didn't just stop, it became irrelevant. Vane stood up, his rifle slipping from his numb fingers. He looked at the spire, which was now a beacon of pure, undeniable truth. The storm had cleared, revealing a sky filled with stars that seemed closer than they had ever been. "It's done," Vane whispered. He turned and walked toward the spire, his boots crunching in the silent snow. He didn't look back at Thorn or the soldiers. He went to find his family. Inside the core, Lyra was slumped against a pillar of light, her skin glowing with a brilliance that made the room look like the center of a sun. She looked up as Vane entered, her face weary but transfigured by a peace that was deeper than anything Vane had ever known. "They heard it," she said, her voice a soft, musical vibration. "The song of the root. They know who we are now." Vane knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. He felt the child kick, a strong, purposeful movement that made him laugh through his tears. "Yeah," Vane said, kissing her forehead. "They know. And now we've got some work to do, because a song is one thing, but building a home is a whole different scrap." The spire continued to pulse, a steady heartbeat for a planet that had finally stopped holding its breath. The future had arrived, and it was written in the golden light of a choice that had shaken the stars. The first spring on Charisma 4 after the Great Awakening was unlike any other in the planet's recorded history. The Rust Sea was still there, a vast expanse of iron and heat, but near the North Pole, where the spire had breathed life into the ancient terraforming engines, the ice was beginning to melt into rivers of clear, cold water. Small, hardy plants with silver leaves, seeds that had been dormant in the permafrost for 10,000 years, were beginning to poke through the red soil. Vane Karsan stood in the middle of a small garden plot behind a new dwelling made of ivory stone and Terran composite. He wasn't wearing his tactical vest or his paratrooper boots. Instead, he wore a simple linen shirt and trousers, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the faded military tattoo on his forearm. In his hand, he held a spade, not a rifle. "You're planting them too deep, Vane," a voice called out. Vane looked up and smiled. Lyra was standing on the porch, cradling a bundle wrapped in soft, iridescent fabric. She looked healthy, her lavender skin glowing with a vibrant vitality, her silver hair braided back. "I'm a soldier, Lyra. I like things reinforced," Vane joked, wiping sweat from his brow. He walked over to her, his movements fluid and relaxed, the tension of the war dog years finally gone from his shoulders. He looked down at the bundle. Inside, a baby with skin the color of a twilight sky and eyes like swirling gold nebulae blinked up at him. She didn't cry. She hummed, a low rhythmic sound that made the air around her feel warm and safe. "How's Lyra doing?" Vane asked, reaching out a calloused finger to touch the infant's tiny hand. "She's hungry for the sun," Lyra said, leaning her head against Vane's shoulder. "And she wants to know when her father's going to stop playing in the dirt and come inside for the midday meal." Vane laughed, a sound that felt natural in the quiet air of the new Charisma. "Just a few more rows. I want these silver ferns to be tall enough to provide shade by the time she's walking." The world had changed, but it hadn't become a utopia overnight. There were still tensions. The Terran command had fractured, with many soldiers choosing to stay on Charisma to build a new life, while others fled back to the inner colonies, terrified of the truth the spire had revealed. The House Obsidian had gone into a period of deep mourning and transition, their rigid laws of blood shattered by the realization that their purity was a self-imposed prison. But here, in this small valley near the spire, the experiment was working. Humans and Xylari worked side by side, building houses, planting crops, and learning a language that was a bridge between their two cultures. They called themselves the Charismans, the first people of the return. Commander Thorn had stayed. He was now a foreman at the Southern Irrigation Project, using his organizational skills to lead teams of engineers instead of infantry. He and Vane didn't talk much, but they had shared a bottle of synth whiskey a month ago, sitting in silence as the triple sun set. No apologies were spoken, but none were needed. The pulse had said everything that needed to be said. Vane sat down on the edge of the porch, looking out over the valley. He watched a group of children, some human, some Xylari, playing near the riverbank. They didn't see species. They didn't see assets or threats. They just saw friends. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small hand-carved wooden bird his mother had made. It was scarred and worn, a relic of a world that felt a million light years away. He placed it on the railing of the porch, next to a piece of Xylari crystal Lyra had given him, the wood and the light, the earth and the stars. I spent 42 years of my life believing that my value was measured by the orders I followed and the enemies I put in the ground. I thought that a man was defined by the flag he carried or the blood that ran through his veins. I was a machine, built by an empire that didn't care about my soul, only my aim. I chose the desert because I thought I was broken, a piece of scrap that didn't fit the pattern anymore. But standing here, with the sun on my face and my daughter's heartbeat echoing in the link, I realize how wrong I was. We aren't born into a pattern, we weave it with every choice we make. Family isn't a matter of DNA or ancient laws. It's the person you pull out of a fire. It's the hand you hold when the stars are falling. It's the decision to stay when the whole universe tells you to run. I look at my hands now, and I don't see weapons. I see tools for building a future I never thought I'd live to see. I used to be afraid of the ghosts, but now I know they were just waiting for me to find a reason to stop fighting them. Humanity isn't a race. It's a capacity for love that transcends the biology of our skin. We are the architects of our own belonging. Vane looked at the wooden bird one last time, then stood up and picked up his spade. He had work to do. He had a garden to finish for a daughter who would never know the meaning of a Class 7 anomaly. He paused, looking toward the horizon where the spire still glowed with a soft, protective silver light. He felt a sudden, quiet wonder, a question that drifted through his mind like the scent of the silver ferns. I spent my whole life looking for a war to win, only to find that the greatest victory was simply choosing to be a father to someone the world said I shouldn't love. I wonder, in your own life, what are the walls you've built out of blood and tradition? And if you had the chance to pull one brick out, what kind of world would you see on the other side? Vane smiled, a slow, peaceful expression, and pushed his spade back into the red soil. The desert was no longer quiet. It was singing. The wooden bird sat on the railing, its wings catching the golden light of the triple suns. Nearby, a tiny silver sprout unfurled its first leaf, reaching hungrily for the warmth of a new beginning.